Good morning, everyone. We will probably start in another minute, let people filter in. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar covering the latest public health order. My name is Melinda Huntley. I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Travel Association, and joining me this morning is my friend and colleague, Joe Savarese, with the Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association. So we're really glad that all of you joined us. We felt it was important to offer you this webinar this morning to review what's in the latest public health order, as well as what's not in the public health order, and to give you an opportunity to post any questions you may have. So throughout this presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat function to post any questions, and we will address every single one at the conclusion of our brief presentation. A few questions were submitted to us with registration, and we were going to address some of those directly at the end. So OTA and OHLA have worked together throughout the pandemic to make sure that really our messages were united and delivered with a strong and larger voice. And I speak, I think, for Joe as well, that we're thrilled with this new order, as we believe it directly delivers what we've been asking for: more trust that businesses will do the right thing, and in a more flexible and simplified approach. This order provides you a lot more leeway to implement the most important things to keep people safe: masks, social distancing, hand washing, and sanitization. The governor repeatedly mentions that this is a common sense approach, and we agree. There are no new mandates identified in this order. Everything that's in this order, you should already have in place. What it does, however, is loosen some of the mandates, which we will talk about. Joe, do you have anything you wanted to add before we get started?
Well, I just want to say I appreciate working with you and Ohio Travel Association. One thing I like about both of our organizations is, we focus on doing the work, helping our members, and doing things that are good for the travel economy. It is not always in either of our natures to blow our horns like some other organizations, but I want the participants on this call to know, and Melinda's members as well as ours, that both of the organizations and Melinda and OTA have been key in getting results in the changes that are happening with the orders. And I think we together is really, when we started collaborating together, is when we were moving the needle on that. And we've seen several changes before this, which were helpful. And now it's part of the change in direction the state is taking. That's going to be good for the travel economy and good for business. So I do thank you for the work that we've done together and the collaboration. And I want members of both organizations to know this has produced results for you. And we've been focused on the, on the what and not the how, not how we've persuaded key officials all the way up to the governor about things that needed to be addressed. And they are continuing to do that. And also that there's more to come. Part of what we're going to talk about today is where we are right now with this order, but it is part of a journey. And our organizations are collaborating on the post-order environment where we don't have all of these multitude of state orders and requirements that we've been dealing with for almost an entire year. And there is a way forward after that with industry leading the way. And that's been Melinda and my message to public officials all the way up to the governor, is that government shouldn't lead the way. Industry should lead the way. You are the experts. You know what works in your unique environments and situations. You know the clients that you serve. And we're going to talk about those steps forward once we get through an overview of what happened with the new order. And we'll talk about what the next steps are and what lays ahead. We're excited about that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joe. So the first thing you have to understand is that the 18 public health orders listed here have been rescinded. These mandates that were in these orders no longer apply. I mean, they're gone. This new health order that we're going to share today is the one you have to pay attention to. And the list we have here are some of those that, you know, may be more applicable to our industry. But the biggest thing you do have to understand is that the mandates within these are gone because the governor basically lifted these orders. All right, so let's get started. What does the new public health order cover? And we've kind of broken them down into different sections. And we've also identified how it applies more to the Ohio travel economy in some cases. So we can help you understand what they say a little better. Facial coverings, masks, still required, should be worn at all times. Any indoor location that's not a resident. Outdoors, when it's impossible to maintain a 6-foot distance. Waiting for riding, driving, operating public transportation. This would include ferry boats, right? It could include, you know, anything that is a transportation vehicle. And what you're going to notice as we go throughout this is we're going to repeat this stuff over and over and over again because things are repeated over and over again in the order. Mask, social distancing. That's one of the number one things that you'll see. So there'll be some common language as we go throughout. So facial coverings still required. There are still some exemptions and there's some changes here. Seated and actively eating and drinking, you don't have to wear a mask, but we're going to get into specifics about what that means later. While working alone in an enclosed space such as an office, you don't have to wear a mask. That's nothing new. The next one, however, says if an individual is separated by at least 6 feet in all directions in a space that's not used or accessible by the public, such as maybe an office space. So that's a little different, right? So what they're basically saying is maintain that 6-foot distancing, but if you're in an office that isn't accessible to the public, and you can define that, what is that, right? If you only have like one vendor or something, is that accessible to the public? No. Then you don't necessarily have to wear a mask as long as you're maintaining that social distancing. Broadcasting, actively participating in broadcasting communications. I interpret that as, if you have an event and you have someone on the mic, that's broadcasting. They wouldn't have to wear a mask if they're speaking into a mic like that. And then some of the things that we've heard before, less than 10 years old, a medical condition prevents them from wearing one, communicating with someone who's hearing impaired, actively participating in a fitness facility as long as 6 or more feet of distance between individuals exist, law enforcement, and then again, back to what was in the original exemptions, if it's prohibited by law, or documented industry standards, business safety policies, etc. Social distancing. And this is one that we've been asking for a very, very long time. So social distancing, this is the new mandate, keeping the 6 feet of separation. Everyone always asks, about this 10-person mass gathering. This more clearly defines what that means. So when people are gathered in any setting, individuals should be in a group of no more than 10. And each group should be separated from other groups by at least 6 feet. So think of it as a party size. So you're not going to, if you're a restaurant, you're not going to have people seated in as a group of 12. If you are an attraction, and you do guided tours, and you have a group coming in that's maybe 20, separate them into 2 groups of 10. And we created this little diagram so just so we could clarify it a little bit. So it means 6 feet in all distance. That's how that 10 rule is applied in this environment. So think of them as party sizes or pods, and you have to keep each of those parties separated by 6 feet from the next group. Discourage congregating and encourage one-way traffic. Nothing new here, right? Again, they've been saying all along, discouraging, standing or sitting close together, maybe in buildings or other parts of the premises. Networking events take this into consideration and encourage one-way traffic. So, let's say, your museum or convention center, if there is, when possible, where possible, please note that, right? So if there is a way to convert the traffic to one-way direction, then, please do so. So, but it does have that clause, where possible. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Joe to talk about the next set of regulations.
So I think you've seen in the first part that Melinda covered, we're not talking about fundamental changes to things that we've been doing so far. In a hotel environment, that groups of 10 separated by 6 feet is what we've been doing for former banquet and catering exception that we operated under. So it's really just looking at this with a fresh set of eyes. They've gone back to the most basic of what they want to keep in place for now, and it's 6 feet of separation between groups of up to 10, and that's what banquet and catering has been. And I think you're going to see that as we continue through the other parts that are in this very short and really rather simple order compared to some of the other orders. And this is one point where we are getting some questions because there is a little bit of difference with this one, and that's the capacity limit for meetings and gatherings and events in indoor facilities with fixed seating. So you're seeing a lot of reports in the media and you're hearing this from different sources about a 25% capacity limit. And that is for, and this is the word that they use, spectators. So I think that gives you an indication of the intent of where this is aimed. It's at events with fixed seating. So that is not the same as a banquet and catering environment that we had been operating under since last June, because meeting spaces in hotels and other meeting venues where we use tables and chairs and move things around are not covered by this. What we're really talking about here are stadiums and performance venues, theaters with specific fixed seating. And then there is a requirement for that. When the seating is not fixed, 25% capacity doesn't apply. So I think that's been one of the bigger points of confusion right now. You still have to provide 6 feet of distancing for people who are not parties of 10 in those non-fixed seating environments, but it's not covered by that capacity requirement. So there is also a provision in the new order that calls out some other guidelines for exhibitions, competitions, and auctions. This is under a subheading that applies to those events. And it again reiterates maintaining that 6 feet of distancing when possible in those environments. And that's a phrase that's been in different orders since last June. I've called that out many times to say that, there are instances when you're not always going to be able to have 6 feet of distance between every 2 individuals in the state of Ohio. It is not against the law to use your elevators, and most elevators involve people being closer than 6 feet together. There are other steps that you can take, but it's not always possible to maintain 6 feet of distancing when people are moving around or coming in and out of these events. The order does state that if it's a competition, family members have priorities in viewing areas. That's an indication that family member spectators are permissible as well. And what they're concerned about are those pods of 10 and keeping distance between the different pods. Microphones must be sanitized after each person uses them according to the rule, a very specific and granular requirement that they wanted to include, which is a standard that we support and it's part of our industry guidance. Virtual events are encouraged, but it's certainly not a requirement. Certainly we are allowed to have events in the state of Ohio, but as a whole, they're still encouraging virtual and hybrid options, which can still be beneficial for us for the coming months. And specifically for the auctions environment, buyers have priority seating and social distancing has to be maintained at all events and in those requirements as well. That just shows a little bit of the focus too, when you think about the groups covered, who are the groups that they are trying to target some of this new order at as well. There's specific guidance for food and beverage, and this equates for many members of both organizations that were operating under those banquet and catering operating requirements as well. And now the food and beverage requirement is simplified and states that they still need to be seated while eating and drinking. That's still going to be in place for some time. The tables should be 6 feet apart again, no more than 10 feet per table. Face coverings worn when people are not actively eating or drinking. Face coverings and face masks are the key to what the governor and the state of Ohio want to see maintained in place for now. And food and beverage needs to be consumed while seated in a food and beverage, and that includes banquet and catering environment. But what about if we're talking about outdoors? Well, the state has issued the updated Responsible Restart Ohio guidance for the new order, and all of the old Responsible Restart Ohio documents are now obsolete because there's one. And we are circulating this to you, and it's been in several of our updates for both organizations. I can tell you we're doing a new update today, and you'll see this document again. This document has a couple of points to consider regarding restaurant and bars and banquet facilities and eating outside, and designating areas for tables for seating for food and drink consumption is recommended at outdoor organized gatherings, not banquet and catering and restaurant bar environments, but for other fairs and events where there is food available. It's recommended to have a seating area. And it's recommended that you seat no more than 10 per table and ensure that the tables are 6 feet apart. I think the recommendation is a sign that the state recognizes that seated eating isn't going to be workable in all outdoor event environments, especially fairs and festivals. And ensuring that attendees are seated when food and drink is consumed in those outdoor environments is consistent with what we do with restaurants and bars and banquet and catering, but it's a recommendation for these outdoor venues. Now, I will say this, that if you're a bar restaurant operator, and many of our hotels have bars and restaurants that have an outdoor patio, that is still part of the bar and restaurant establishment in the eyes of the state. And they've been pretty consistent throughout the progression of the orders that outdoor patios are treated like the indoor parts of the restaurant and bar in terms of making sure that people are seated and are wearing masks if they're not actively eating or drinking. Until all of the bar, restaurant, and banquet and catering rules are finally lifted, our recommendation is to treat your outdoor patio the same as you treat the indoor part of your bar and restaurant or banquet facility. The sanitization requirements couldn't be clearer. It's about routinely disinfecting high contact surfaces and areas, part of the industry guidance and what we've all been following for the better part of a year as well. For personal sanitization and hand washing, requiring hand washing and sanitization upon entry of a facility, having sanitizer available for employees, but also customers and visitors and patrons. which I think, we've all pretty much implemented those standards past year as well. I think those are going to last even beyond the orders, by the way. Having sanitizers more readily available is going to be an industry standard and a guest demand. Providing sanitizers that meet CDC guidelines and making sure that we're compliant in terms of the standards for the effectiveness of those sanitizers. And then you couldn't get more common sense than covering your coughs and sneezes, et cetera. For signage, there still is a signage requirement specifically to wearing masks and social distancing in general, maintaining 6-foot distancing as much as possible. So it is important to continue using signage, and we both have sample and model signage available that we can provide you. Air quality for indoor venues is going to be a really major focus, I think, going forward. And the requirements now in the order maximize ventilation and, where possible, to include, the opening of doors and windows to assist in circulation when that works within an environment. Of course, with many hotels, we have rooms that don't have windows that open. Again, that's where possible, where you can do that. But indoor facilities are expected to employ filtration of MERV 13 or higher as soon as possible, is what the rule says. So we're going to continue to see a push to increase filtration and indoor air quality. And I think that's one area where industry standards on indoor air quality will actually exceed the state requirements as we go forward, because there are also additional technologies and active air purification in addition to passive filtration, which we are promoting and we'll talk about in the months ahead. An important reminder and consideration during all of this is that local health departments can always impose stricter regulations or specific requirements at the local level. And our analysis is you're more likely now to see that happen as the state orders are lessened and lifted. That is when we will most likely see the local departments step in with more specific requirements. So discuss those with OTA and OHLA as you're seeing those things happen at the local level. They can also interpret and enforce state requirements in unique ways. And sometimes we do have to have conversations and push back if we think the interpretation of the state requirement is being misapplied by the local health departments. And we've done that. We've had some productive conversations where we've gotten some clarification. But with the new rule, there's not as many things for them to enforce or interpret is the bottom line. And they could come up with requirements regarding capacity size or other things that they want to put in place in lieu of the state orders. So be vigilant about that and make sure that you're discussing that with us when that happens. Since the beginning of the pandemic, confirmed cases has usually been the last part of every order and every piece of guidance that the state has issued. There is still a confirmed case required protocol as part of the new order, and that includes isolating and seeking medical care for anybody who develops symptoms, again, a common sense measure. Contacting the local health department about suspected cases or confirmed exposure. For certain types of events, there are requirements for maintaining lists, for example, of coaches, players, employees present at each event to include the date and the time. That will help local health authorities as they do contact tracing and follow-up. And then there are some recommendations. It's recommended to work with the local health department to identify potentially infected or exposed individuals. It's recommended that once testing is available to test suspected infections and exposures, and there are more test kits available. And if you're interested in obtaining test kits from the state, you can let us know. There are some avenues to receive those. And it's recommended that following testing, you contact the local health department to initiate appropriate care and tracing. It's just a good idea and a common sense practice to liaison with your local health department when you do have cases of confirmed exposure or even suspected exposure. And that's not a big change from the requirements and the recommendations that have been in place in all the previous orders.
Okay, that's it. That is what is in the order. And Joe and I don't know how many times we have said in the last couple of days, if it's not in the order, then it's not a mandate. And so, if you consider, we used to have, the outdoor capacity of 30% no longer applies, right? So remember, in all those previous orders were rescinded. This is the one that matters. So know this order, nothing new, like we've said, everything's already in place. And this kind of comes up when we address this question. So we had a couple questions that were pre-submitted to us. So we're going to address those now. But again, please post any questions in the Q&A and we'll get to those as well. A question came in: how can we encourage our partners to follow guidelines? There doesn't seem to be any consequences in my area for not following the restrictions. And here's how I'm going to answer this. This is less about what the state mandates and what the state says we should and have to do. This is more about how do we get customers right now. And customers expect us to take care of them. Our guests, we're seeing, in Texas, all of a sudden they lifted everything and now they're having cancellations of major conferences and meetings and events and travelers because people don't feel comfortable. So at the end of the day, it is not about what the state requires. It's about what we need to do as businesses to build consumer confidence. This was a question we reached out to our friends at Longwoods International last week, and we asked that this question be included because a question like this was put into their survey before the state mask mandate when people kept questioning, do we require, do we not require? And here's what the study basically says. How likely are you to visit a tourism attraction or a business that does not have clear protocols or mask and distancing requirements? So this survey goes to American travelers. 57%, so 57%, said they're they're unlikely, somewhat or very unlikely to visit a business that doesn't have safety protocols in place versus 28% that said they would. Right? So basically, and then there's that 15% that's indifferent. So I guess the message to you is to understand that really, even as our restrictions are eased from the state level, what do your guests need to feel comfortable walking through your door? And that should be driving your decisions. And so even some of the things you may have in place right now, safety shields or whatever that is, I don't know that I would get rid of them right away because we still have these consumers and our guests very much are still expecting us to take care of them. There was a study done by Impact Research recently, and they actually surveyed visitors who'd been traveling during the pandemic. And what they discovered is that the customer dissatisfaction increased 17%. 17%. They said they were dissatisfied with their experience. But when they dug deeper, they found out that the reason these customers, these guests were dissatisfied is because there was no enforcement of the mask policy or the social distancing. So now we have this very unique situation where not having these safety protocols in place and not enforcing them is, in the minds of many of our visitors, being seen as poor customer service, which I think is pretty fascinating. And we're going to see that continue a little bit. So I think these averages will start to, slowly come towards the center. But when we talk about how do we convince others to follow guidelines or why should we follow guidelines, I guess my message is do it not because you're being told to, but because you are concerned about getting people to your door, and they expect you to have those in place. Joe, did you have anything to add on that?
Just that I couldn't agree more. This is really going to become less about mandates and more about what makes good business sense. And we are, business organizations, we make no bones about that. But we should also remember that the virus and the pandemic are not gone yet either. And it's still important to have health safety requirements and to be sensitive to that for the outcome. We were on track of the numbers dropping, they've leveled off, and then they ticked up. So we do want to continue to have reasonable steps that we take. And that's where we're at now. The government listened and said, industry can lead the way. Just because these are the requirements doesn't mean this is, all you have to do and stop there and throw away all of the good practices we've developed. This is why it matters. Our clientele are going to demand it. I'll bet those numbers increase as more restrictions are lifted. Why do I think that? Melinda said it, because in the states where the restrictions were just totally wiped out, people felt unsafe. So that dovetails nicely with another preview question that we had. Are hotels and owners of other event centers and venues responsible for compliance at private events held in their venues? So are you, as the venue operator or business, responsible? And the answer to that throughout the pandemic has been yes, there is responsibility on the part of the venue. And the new order makes that clear. The new order talks about operating requirements that the state still considers the responsibility of us as businesses and venue owners. It's not just on the event, the clients, or the individuals attending. Those requirements are a lot less than they were just a couple of weeks ago, but there absolutely is still responsibility. Now, you may have seen there's been some discussion about this in the media. There's really not a whole lot of enforcement authority within the order about, well, what are they going to do if we don't have 6 feet of spacing between tables in our banquet and catering facility? But there actually wasn't a whole lot of explicit enforcement authority in previous orders as well. Yet we know when there were habitual or really dramatic offenses where venues exceeded what the requirements allowed, there were instances where the state did take action. Now, most often they worked with us, and there were, it was advisory and request and get into compliance, because they weren't looking to create problems for businesses. They were looking to implement the health standards. So a lot of times there were warnings issued. It is possible, and businesses have received citations, and most often that's reported in the bar and restaurant world where they receive citations for non-compliance. That can still happen, but there's something else that can happen as well. Owners and operators of venues have a responsibility because of liability under the law and liability protections that were passed by the General Assembly before the end of the year last year. And those liability protections allow all of our venues to operate with a sense of relief that they will not be held responsible if somebody sues them because they contracted COVID-19 from being at an event on their property or visiting the property or attraction or venue, or driving by it and breathing the air and they contracted COVID-19 from it. There is protection in Ohio from businesses from that liability, as long as you take responsible steps to help fight the transmission of the virus. The legal wording is not operating with reckless disregard for health and safety. So we still want to take these measures, even as there are fewer restrictions because of other reasons, consumer confidence, but also, yes, the state can still enforce the rules that are left, and so can local health departments. And the stick that they will use is shutting a venue down, most specifically. If you're not compliant and you don't fix these things, we'll come back and we'll close the event or we'll close the venue. That's the enforcement mechanism local health departments have. And then you have your liability consideration as a business operator. So,
And if I can
Go ahead.
Jump in real quick here, Joe. I'm sorry. And understand this question came in as written, but what he's saying is applicable to a museum or a retail shop
Anything.
or any other business type. I think one thing we've discovered over the past year or so is that we clearly look to see our venue type mentioned specifically. And that's what sometimes causes the confusion, but we have to look at this in a broader context. And so what he's saying is just as applicable to any time you are inviting someone into your business.
I couldn't agree more. The one takeaway with the new order and the changes this week is we are moving toward a post-order world that I keep talking to all of you about. Let's face it, this order itself is temporary. This is not going to be in place for a year, and the governor continues to talk about the date when the order will be lifted in its entirety. That does not mean we will no longer have responsibility, that we won't have legal liabilities, that we won't have client demands. It just means that the state is going to get out of the way and the industry to take the steps that it should take. And that guidance will evolve over time as more people are vaccinated, as numbers drop off. It's going to be there at the start to say, these are the things that we think you should do. And to that point, I wanted to emphasize what we are doing. And we started on the hotel and lodging side, but Melinda and I and OTA are collaborating, and we will make this available in a version that's applicable for all businesses. But we piloted this on the hotel side because we did have the help of the National Hotel Association in creating the Safe Stay program, which has national recognition, but is very much state focused. The national group created the branding and some general standards and some guidelines that every American hotel brand was involved in reviewing and creating rather, and then the CDC reviewed and approved it after that, and it involved partners in the world of cleaning and sanitization from Ecolab and Procter & Gamble and Clorox and all these companies, Lysol, that are involved across the country to create something specific for the hotel environment that we will now evolve for all businesses in the travel economy. But for those of you that are OHLA members, most of you have gotten this. We've actually been sending out a physical kit that has a compliance guide, that has a number of checklists, including one checklist that you can use as part of how you earn compliance recognition. And all of this is at no cost. This is for the members of our organizations to create something that is state focused and state specific. And then you can see we do offer that recognition seal to the hotels that are participating with us now. And it's designed to work with what you do with your other industry groups and with your brands, if you're a franchise operation, and even some of the bigger programs like the GBOC rating that large venues and convention centers and even some of our larger hotels are participating in. All of this works together. But what I like about Safe Stay is it was designed for us to make it state specific, so we continue to evolve the guidance based on what the state rules are and aren't. And it will help us really make it specific that what we're doing here within the state is relevant to all of our first hotel and lodging venues, and then all of our travel economy partners as a whole. So the hotels have seen this. There are still, after today, we'll have 80 member hotels that are still waiting to get their kits. Those are going out at the beginning of the week. Everybody else's will be already in their hands or in their hands in the next few days. I think that this will be part of that post-event or post-order environment, rather, when we're looking for guidance at an event, it won't be the state that tells us how to do things. It will be industry and organizations like ours collaborating to say, these are the best practices, and you as the experts can put those into play in your environments in the way that they work best. So for all you hoteliers, watch for this and get your compliance information back to us so we can get you your initial recognition. And then for those of you that are OTA members, keep an eye out. Melinda and I are going to collaborate on doing a phase 2 of this for Beyond Hotels. And I think it's a really exciting way forward for us to create something more flexible and workable for you than the one size fits all state requirements.
We appreciate that. We appreciate the invitation to build off what you've learned during this pilot. So we're excited for that. All right, let's address Q&As. As I look up these, I want to address one that came in earlier that talked about, is there a capacity limit for outdoor events and festivals? No, no. Remember, if it's not listed, it doesn't apply. So the previous order had said there was a capacity limit of, 30% for outdoor. No, that's gone. So the capacity limit is based on your ability to social distance, which gives you a lot more flexibility. Okay, a couple questions, Joe, for clarity. The groups of 10 do not have to be from the same household. You could have 10 strangers together, specifically thinking of a guided tour. We just talked about this, Joe, this morning. Do you want to take that?
That's a result of work that Melinda and I had specific conversations with the administration about this. That household rule was unworkable and is not part of the new rule.
What is the current requirement for seating at a bar? You have to be seated if you are drinking or eating.
Right, and there was a question in the chat that also talks about some restaurant venue requirements. The requirement is 6 feet, and that still exists. The physical barriers between tables that some restaurant have used are allowed, even though the order doesn't state that. It is included in the Responsible Restart Ohio document that we had on the screen earlier. So that document, which those are called operating requirements, those documents, by the way, the Responsible Restart Ohio document does say that barriers are still permitted. So you have 6 feet or barriers in a bar restaurant environment. That doesn't generally work in banquet and catering because the tables aren't fixed, but barriers are allowed. At a bar, that's just never, it's been one of those things that's never been clear. Can you have people at stools if the stools are not 6 feet apart? I think that is an instance where we are still seeking more clarification, but they never clarified the bar stool place. And what most establishments that I worked with did was they allowed people to sit in adjacent bar stools if they were in the same party. And if they weren't in the same party, then there had to be 6 feet between them. That's that common sense application the governor talks about.
So there were a couple questions about getting the safe stay information, Joe, specifically about can non-OHLA members get that? Can CVBs possibly support to get some of the kits? And I think that's some of the information that as we expand that pilot into the other businesses, we will have that information available, but I don't know if you want to address that right now.
Well, we do make a lot of information available to everybody. I think that our organizations also need the support.
Yes.
The businesses in our industry, because we have been impacted by the pandemic as well, just like all of you have, and that means on our staffing, on our expenses, on what we pay ourselves, and on a lot of other things. And we need businesses to join our organization. So I think that there may be some things that may be a member benefit, while we can also share some general things. But I saw one of the questions in the chat said, well, for smaller properties that aren't members of OHLA. Well, we actually have a version of this for the smaller properties developed for them under our Unique Lodging of Ohio banner. And we do have a part of OHLA that is specific for bed and breakfast, cabins, yurts. All of our friends down in Hocking Hills are big participants in Unique Lodging of Ohio. There's a way for smaller properties to participate that is not cost prohibitive to them. And we have specific guidance for those unique environments, because what works in a hotel doesn't work for them. So I really encourage, our DMO partners to work with us in getting this out to more participants, which we absolutely are going to provide all of our CVB partners and members information that they can push out to their hotels. That would be hugely helpful. So I appreciate any of you that want to do that and help us push this out. So yes, we will have information to help you push it out if you're a DMO. Yes, we have information for even smaller properties under our unique Lodging of Ohio banner. And yes, we will have some information available for entities that aren't members of our organizations, but we're also hopeful that you will all help us get those entities involved with us so that we can continue to provide you those services. Remember that, you know, Melinda and you know, myself, our organizations don't receive state funding. You know, we are not supported by the state, even though we do all this work on the pandemic. You know, we're supported by the industry, and we need your support. So we'll follow up on that. I did see one other question. I didn't want to jump past it, but in addition to the barriers between tables, regarding table size, no, it does not matter in terms of the state order what your table size is for tables of 10. But I think that is an area where common sense does apply. I think you can fit 10 people more reasonably at a larger round table than in some of the smaller ones. And most of the operators that I've dealt with have talked to me about, you know, they didn't seat 10 people at the smaller rounds, but they sat them at the larger rounds. But that is not a state mandate or requirement, so you can fit what works for you and your client. The table size doesn't matter. And if your banquet space can accommodate a certain number of people with 10 guests per table and the seats 6 feet apart, then you can put that many people in your banquet space. It doesn't, there is no limit on the number. There's no percentage of your fire code occupancy. It's what you can fit in that space, 6 feet apart, 10 per table.
Good answers. And thank you, Joe, for mentioning the need for support. And, you know, that I can't reiterate that enough. The work that OHLA does, that OTA does, we're doing on behalf of the industry. And so we do need your support now more than ever before. So I appreciate that. Question: at an outdoor concert fundraiser, are people required to wear masks when walking around? In the order, it says that if you can't maintain 6 feet circumference all the way around, even if you're outdoors, that masks would be required. So from a common sense approach, outdoor fundraiser, if you don't have table and chairs set 6 feet apart, it's going to be very difficult to control people to maintain 6 foot distancing. So, you know, use common sense. In that case, I would mandate masks. You know, it is, again, it's about what people expect you to do more than anything else. And so would people feel comfortable going to an outdoor event where the 6 foot distancing isn't being maintained and masks weren't required? So it's not going to call out specifically situation by situation in this order, but what it says is outdoors, when it is impossible to maintain a 6 foot distance, then facial coverings would be required. And what about dancing? So, yeah, right, Joe? We were just talking about this too. And I'm gonna turn things over to Joe on this because he's the dancing mandate guru here.
My favorite subject, dancing. Yeah. There was a period when I was getting more questions about dancing than any other subject. And to the point where we actually created a guidance document because there was no guidance document from the state. It was clear, even under the stricter rules, that dancing was permitted. It was specifically listed as a permitted activity, yet we had social distancing mandates in place. And the question was, how can we maintain social distancing and operate a dance floor? And my somewhat flippant off the cuff answer is, you can't. You pick one and you do that. But to be serious about it, that's a perfect example of what the governor means by common sense implementation of the rules. Dancing is allowed, and there is no prohibition on dancing. And if you're going to have people on a dance floor, you're going to have people who are not 6 feet apart and most likely not necessarily within their group of 10. That doesn't mean that there aren't still safety steps that you can take. For example, requiring masks right now on a dance floor would be required because the mask mandate exists. So I have a note about dance floors that we created that just talks through what some of that guidance is. But this is a perfect example about how the state orders don't always work perfectly, which the governor and lieutenant governor and everybody has said all along. These aren't perfect. Sometimes they conflict with themselves. And what we have to do is find a way to implement them that maintains the intent of what the state of Ohio is trying to do, and also produce the outcome, keeping people safe and limiting the risk of spread of the virus. You can do that and still operate a dance floor, but you're not going to get that guidance from the state. What the state says is maintain social distancing as much as you can, and you should have 6 feet of distancing in most situations, but since dance floors are allowed, that's just one of those exceptions. So that's the kind of guidance I think industry and groups like ours step in to provide you some thoughts and ideas about if dance floors do work within your environment. That's a decision you'll make, and that's a decision that should be made business to business. You should make that decision, not the state.
Another question, clarification on buffets and banquets and the need for sneeze guards. That's another example of if it's not in this order, it doesn't apply. So no, there's no state mandate restricting the buffets or requiring the sneeze guards. Do you start yanking those out right now because they were in place before? I don't know that I would recommend it. It is, again, that common sense, right? It's not a mandate. But what do you need to do to make your customers feel more comfortable? And I think Joe and I even had the conversation earlier this week. It's like, it's not that we would advise yanking out everything you have in place right now. You know, nothing in this order is above and beyond what you're already doing. It's just loosening up the restrictions. So there is nothing regarding buffets. There is nothing regarding the use of sneeze guards at ticket counters or anywhere else. But would we advise you take them out right now? Probably not. If they're already in place, it just helps with that consumer confidence. Joe, did you want to add anything on that one?
I think that will be the way forward. The industry guidelines and recommendations will contain numerous things. And like you do in other parts of your business, and we all did prior to the pandemic, you will pick and choose from those about what works in your environment. But you know, the guidance is that sneeze guards and barriers are still a helpful step in some environments. It doesn't work well in every environment, but in some environments they do. So it's still a recommended practice, but there are lots of recommendations, and your individual plan might be these 7 out of 10 recommendations are what work for us and create a safe environment and give our guests and clients and patrons what they want. And that's what we think this should be going forward. You decide that. It's still a good idea, but it's not workable in every situation. And it's definitely not required by the state. So if you choose to go another way, you're okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, please post. We're at 10:53, so we have time for a few more questions. There's a question that's not as related to the order. Is it truly realistic that the state reaches the 50 cases per 100,000 threshold by the time the new law goes into effect, that the Ohio legislature can overturn the orders of the governor? Again, I'm going to go back to what I say all the time. It doesn't matter what the state says as far as mandates. What matters is what your customers are going to expect. In which case, whether or not we reach that, 50 cases per 100,000, and all orders are lifted, what we're seeing in other states that have lifted all orders is, again, they're losing business because of the perception that they're not safe environments. And the businesses are losing meetings, they're losing group tours, they're losing all this business because people don't feel safe. And the businesses are now having to put back some of the safety protocols, not because they're required to by law, but because their customers expect it. And I guess I always go back to the concept that we're in the hospitality business. Our customers have always been number one. And so we need to go back to that understanding that our customers are number one. What do they need? In which case, it doesn't matter, what happens at the state level when those guidelines are lifted, because I foresee we're going to have most of the protocols in place for a while, just in order to get people through the door. Joe, did you want to add anything?
A quick answer, I agree with all that. I think the lifting of the orders does help us in terms of that idea Melinda and I have been working on about the state being open for events and travel. We still need the governor and lieutenant governor out there saying that's the one thing they haven't done yet. They're not doing that yet. Yeah. But it's, Wade, I would answer your question and say it's possible. I don't know about the word realistic. It is possible to hit that number. I had crunched some numbers, and we were actually on track to hit that number before the end of April, before these past couple weeks. It's only been a couple weeks where it ticked up. So it could, in the month of May even, because we still have April and May, it could tick down again before we get to that June 23rd effective date. That's the date that the legislation's effective. I would say it's possible. It's not as likely as we were a couple of weeks ago, but man, that changes fast. A couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we were on track to hit that number before the end of April, which is, nobody thought that was, possible. So I would say don't give up hope that we could get there yet. And even if not, the action the legislature takes, could be to rescind it. And then we're right where Melinda said, but then what? And the then what has to be that we all have practices and protocols and things like Safe Stay and other pieces in place to show people that, we're not the wild, wild west when it comes to, health safety and the virus. I'll tell you what, Wade, whether the order is lifted or not, by the time the legislation becomes effective on the 23rd, the virus isn't going to be gone by then. Mm-hmm. We better have this, these other steps in place, either way.
Well, awesome. I think that is the last question. Joe, I don't see any more. If I have missed one, I apologize, but I've tried to go through this pretty readily. We appreciate all of you being here. And as always, reach out to the two of us if you have additional questions or thoughts. Something comes to you later, you need clarification. But we did record this, so we will have this made available to you. And we appreciate not only you being here, but we truly appreciate your support of our organizations and your support of our ability to do the work that supports you. So I can't thank you enough for that.
Totally agree.
Any last minute?
Yeah, all of you that have joined us today and been patient with your time and so giving, it really is what matters. Talk it up. Talk to your colleagues, both within your businesses and outside, about getting involved with us, about the work that we are doing. This becomes more important now that the state is getting out of the way. We are all going to have to work together as the travel economy to get on the road to recovery and to help lead that recovery. And we can't do it without you. I say this all the time, and it's true for Melinda and OTA too. Our organization isn't me and the team that and our environs, our office, where we work. It's all of you. You are the association. You're the owners. Melinda and I, we work for all of you, and that's why that buy-in is so important. And there's no barrier to anybody to be a member, especially during the pandemic. I think we've been very forgiving and flexible in terms of getting on board. Cost is not a barrier to participation. Keep supporting us, and we will keep producing the results and the products for you that you're seeing now.
Excellent. All right. Have a great day, everyone.